Welcome everyone. Myself Dr. Ankush Gupta, Senior Project Officer, National Anti-Doping Agency, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Government of India. Today I will talk about the World Anti-Doping Agency related standard and the World Anti-Doping Code, associated guidelines and the roles and responsibilities of the anti-doping organization all across the world. My topic is outlined basically in the following matters and categories: the doping and the strict liabilities which lies with the athletes and the athlete support personnel and other persons in the country, the origin of the anti-doping practices and the anti-doping framework all across the world, the convention which we call as the UNESCO International Convention Against Doping in Sports, which sets the procedures, policies, regulations, framework for the state parties which are signatory to this convention, the World Anti-Doping Code, the World Anti-Doping Agencies and the related international standards and the guidelines which enables anti-doping organizations to adopt their best practices in their respective regions. And coming to that, the anti-doping program which is applicable and being implemented in our country by the national anti-doping agencies. In the end, I will talk about the national anti-doping agencies, which is the nodal agencies responsible for implementing and putting efforts to eradicate doping menace in our country, having some references for this today's topic. Now, doping. We all know that doping is not allowed, it is prohibited, it is a cheating in sports, but some of the sports persons and the persons they tend to commit this type of cheating in sports. Basically, doping is a common terminology. It is a layman's language which tells us that this is cheating, something happened in sports. But if we talk about the uh, the World Anti-Doping Agency code and National Anti-Doping Agency's rules, it is a violation of the anti-doping rules adopted by the particular country or the anti-doping organization. There are acts or the conducts defined in the anti-doping rules or the World Anti-Doping Code, and any athlete or support personnel or any other person, if found to violate the rules in place, then we call as a anti-doping rule violation, and in a general term it is a doping. Doping, we have learned that doping is only the consumption of the prohibited substances by the athlete, which eventually enhances the sporting performance and have some extra benefit or additional improvement in their performance. But this is not the only case. We have some other violations also, other kinds of doping also as per the rules defined by the agency, like refusal of the sample to the authority, evasion from the doping control process, or trafficking of the prohibited substances, or complicity, prohibited association within the sporting ecosystem, and the whereabouts failure clause is also very important with regard to the anti-doping rule violation. So, my dear friend, the doping is not only the consumption of the prohibited substances, it is the occurrence of one or more anti-doping rule violation in defined in the code and the rules. There are total at present 11 anti-doping rule violation which comprises the doping elements in sports. Now, what are the substances and methods which are prohibited by the WADA for doping in sports? There are basically more than 350 substances which are comprises in the prohibited list identified by the WADA, which is being implemented every year from 1st January 2020, like for example 2025. 1st January, the new sets of prohibited list has already come into place. It is available in the WADA website, in the public portal also, and which is going to be effective from 1st January 2025 next year. Before introducing any substances or methods in the prohibited list, the World Anti-Doping Agency has in consultation with the other global health regulatory authorities and the pharmacological manufacturing companies, pharma companies, that what are those substances which may have fulfilled the three criteria or any of the two criteria from the following um, uh, criteria. Like for example, if any pharmacological preparation or the substances having potential of enhancing the sporting performance of the athlete. Second, any pharmacological preparation or medication which has a threat to the athlete's health, like athlete health can be deteriorated by consumption of those prohibited substances, and any substances which may violate the spirit of the sports. These are the three criteria for having consideration of any prohibited substances into the prohibited list of categories of the substances. And any substances or the methods which fulfills any of the two of the three criteria which is mentioned here can be considered for the inclusion in the doping agents or the prohibited substances by the World Anti-Doping Agency. Basically, the doping is prohibited use of prohibited substances or violation of anti-doping rules provisions which may enhance the sporting performance and fundamentally wrong and unethical and is detrimental to the overall spirit of the sports. Drug misuse can be harmful to an athlete's health also, not to the individual and to other athletes who is competing in the sports. Basically, doping severely damages the integrity, image and values of the sports, whether or not the motivational to use drugs is to improve sporting performance. We all know that to achieve the integrity and fairness in sports and to save our future generation, which is having the sports, lover and those who can give something to the sports, a commitment to the clean sports field of play is very critical, and we all have to work in coordination to eradicate this menace in our sporting ecosystem. In a global anti-doping framework system, there is a mechanism, there is a guideline set in place which regulates the overall procedures of the systems of the global related to the anti-doping framework. There is an international convention against the doping in sports, which is the fundamental and the binding document for all the government signatories and the public authorities. Then after, the World Anti-Doping Code and the national anti-doping rules in every country, which is the signatory of the WADA code and the UNESCO convention. These three processes and the documents outlines the anti-doping framework all across the globe. What is the convention? The convention is the commitment of the governments to adopt the best practices and to have the fair play concept and environment in their country. The international convention and the cooperation to protect ethics, integrities and values, to have the capacity building to assist the government and developing national anti-doping programs through policies, framework and trafficking and the supplement the health and policies. Also, the education and prevention program which is outlined in the convention and the WADA code to have foster sports values and informing the youth and about the consequences. The convention, it is the International Convention Against the Doping in Sports, which was adopted in 2005 at the 33rd UNESCO General Assembly Conference and entered into force from 1st February 2007, which is ratified by more than 191 state parties and the countries all across the globe. And the unique feature of this convention is the second most ratified of all UNESCO treaties which is available. This international convention aims to prevent and eliminate doping in sports. The convention has 43 articles, 2 annexures and 3 appendixes, and the World Anti-Doping Code is also one of the appendix of this convention. India signed the convention in 2007 and currently a member of the Conference of Parties 9 Bureau, and India is also chair of the Fund Approval Committee of the Convention, which mobilizes monetary resources to support the functioning of the Convention, especially in the Asia-Oceania region. Now, what are the objectives of the Convention? The objective of the International Convention Against Doping in Sports is to harmonize the anti-doping legislation, guidelines, regulations and rules etc. internationally in order to provide a fair and equitable playing free environment for all the athletes and the support personnel. There are some commitments, there are some responsibilities of the governments who are the state parties to this convention, and they have a commitment to encourage international cooperation to protect athletes and the ethics of the sports, limit the availability of the prohibited substances and the methods by combating trafficking, imposing some sanctions, imposing regulations, facilitate doping control and support national testing program. To encourage producers and the distributors of the nutrition supplements to establish best practices in the labeling, marketing and distribution of the products which might contain the prohibited substances, and to support the implementation of the anti-doping education program all across the country and to promote the anti-doping research and development. And there is a convention, there is an objective, there is a commitment of the government and the state parties. So, obviously, there should be a monitoring mechanism to this convention, whether the state parties are complying these measures of the convention or to some extent or not, then there is a monitoring system is in place to have the implementation of this convention. Article 31 of the International Convention Against Doping in Sports is clearly depicts that every 2 years state parties has to submit a national report on compliance to the conference of parties, those who can evaluate, those who can oversee the development of the international best practices. The monitoring tool of the anti-doping convention is the outline, the online self-assessment anti-doping logic questionnaire, which is available after every period of 2 years for the state parties to submit their compliance report. Compliance with the convention is measured through 21 principal questions of the AD logic questionnaire covering the 4 thematic areas of the convention, which are as below. The state parties has to prepare and compile the reports of the particular 2 years period covering the 4 thematic areas: national activities to strengthen the anti-doping practices, international cooperation, education and training and the research. All these 4 areas and a key thematic field has to be in general documented by the state parties, so that the compliance can be evaluated by the COP of the international convention. The national report is generated automatically by the AD logic systems questionnaire based on the responses provided by the state parties. Now, this is the convention, which is the commitment of the government and the signatories, state parties to the anti-doping best practices in their respective countries. What is the relationship between the convention and the WADA code? In the fight against doping in sports, state parties commit themselves to the principle of the codes as the basis for the measures provided for in Article 5 of this convention. What is Article 5 of the convention? It clearly defines that measures to achieve the objective of the convention in abiding by the obligation contained in this convention. Each state parties undertakes to adopt appropriate measures. Such measures may include legislation, regulations, rules, policies or administrative practices. It is as per the law of the land of that particular country or the particular region that in what manner, how they can implement these anti-doping best practices into their domestic system. The World Anti-Doping Agency, which is established in 1999, the WADA's funding is sourced equally from the Olympic movement and the government of the world. The World Anti-Doping Code is the core document that harmonizes the anti-doping practices, rules and regulations within the sports organization and among the public authorities all across the world. The unique feature of this World Anti-Doping Agency is that that it is a body, it is a international entity which promotes best practices amongst the anti-doping organizations. And the anti-doping organization comprises the national anti-doping organization, regional anti-doping organizations, and the international federations and the major event organizers like Olympics, Games, Commonwealth Games, and the Asian Games and other World Games Championship. The World Anti-Doping Code is a fundamental and a universal document upon which the World Anti-Doping Program in sports is based. The code is to advance the anti-doping effort through universal harmonization of core anti-doping elements, which is education, detection, deterrence, and enforcement into their respective domestic region. The WADA code revised from time to time, and the next code is under process of stakeholder consultation, which is scheduled to be revised with effect from 1st January 2027. As of now, we have a 2021 code in place, which is being implemented by the respective anti-doping organization. What is the purpose of the code? The purpose of the code is basically to protect the athlete's fundamental rights to participate in doping-free sports and thus promote a health, fairness and equality for all athletes worldwide. To ensure harmonized, coordinated and effective anti-doping programs at the international as well as national level with regard to the prevention of doping, including education and awareness. The code is in conjunction with the 8 international standards which aims to foster the consistency among anti-doping organizations in various areas. As I said that 2021 version of the World Anti-Doping Code and international standards are in place, which is applicable all across the anti-doping organization to implement in their domestic region. There are total 8 international standards if I talk about, associated with the technical guidelines and documents. The first standard says that the code compliance has to be in compliance with the anti-doping code and policies, which is the international standard for code compliance by the signatories ISCCS. And we as a national anti-doping organization signatory to the WADA code are bound to comply these compliances as a signatory. International standard for testing and investigation, which is a vital document which starts the sample collection processes, defines the integrity, identity of the sample is to be maintained as per this ISTI guidelines. International standard for therapeutic use exemption, which is also one of the important standards to have benefit to the athlete on the legitimate medical conditions to have a use of the prohibited substances for the purpose of the therapeutic. Next is the international standard for the protection of privacy and personal information. Then after international standard for laboratories, the prohibited list, the education and the result management. These are the core 8 international standards and the associated guidelines which enables anti-doping organizations to adopt the best practices in their system and to have implementation of the full anti-doping program. Like I said that every anti-doping organization are bound to comply with these standards, whether it is code compliance or testing and investigations, international standard for the therapeutic use exemption, ISPPPAI, international standard for laboratories. This is the standards which is applicable directly to the WADA accredited laboratories and approved laboratories by the WADA, those who are involved in analysis of the doping samples collected by the anti-doping organization. They have to ensure, they have to make sure that the analysis systems and the procedures within the laboratories are in full compliance to the World Anti-Doping guidelines and this ISL. Next one is the international standards for the prohibited list. This is also very unique standards which is annually updated by the WADA, and 1st January of every year we have a new version of the prohibited list which comprises the substances and the methods which are prohibited in sports, whether it is in competition, out of competition or all times or in particular sports. These substances and methods classified in the list by different categories like steroids, stimulants and anabolic agents, dietetics, etc. Next is the international standard for education, which is also a new standards with regard to the 2021 code, alongside with the international standard for the result management, which clearly demonstrate the steps and the procedures stages involved in anti-doping organizations result management processes, that the athlete has to be notified properly with regard to the adverse analytical findings or any anti-doping rule violation which has occurred as per the procedure and the policies. Every athlete has to be given a fair chance and impartial hearing so that the athlete can present their case in a proper manner so as to avoid any consequences. But the rule is very simple and clear, that if any athlete has committed an anti-doping rule violation, the hearing processes has to be a consequences and a further sanction on the athletes, those who committed the anti-doping rule violation. Coming to our country systems, like we are one of the anti-doping organizations as per the defined policies of the WADA, World Anti-Doping Code. Anti-doping program in India primarily comprises the two nodal agencies, the bodies. One is the National Anti-Doping Agency, another is the National Dope Testing Laboratory. There are clear-cut functions defined for both the anti-doping entities in our countries. Like for the NADA, we are involved for the test planning, sample collection, result management, education and gathering some intelligence also. On the other hand, the National Dope Testing Laboratories, which is the only accredited laboratory by the World Anti-Doping Body in India, and they are involved in sample analysis and producing the results of the analysis, whether it is adverse analytical findings or there is no adverse analytical findings in the samples. In addition to the sample analysis, they are also involved in some research and educational activities. As far as NADA is concerned, we established in 2009 as an autonomous body under the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, Government of India, and the primary functions of the NADA is to implement the anti-doping program in our country, which primarily comprises the sample collection for the doping control processes, anti-doping education, awareness, result management, legal management, adjudication and some intelligence gathering and the investigation. NADA for the past 15 years is trying to educate the athlete, the sporting ecosystem and to have some deterrence mechanism also, so that each and every anti-doping rule violation or the doping cases has to be concluded in a systematic manner as per the applicable rules. Like the rules, national anti-doping rules. What are those rules? These national anti-doping rules are the or the formation from the World Anti-Doping Code basically, and we as a National Anti-Doping Agency is the signatory to the WADA code and accepted the code whenever it is being revised, like in 2009, 2015, 2021 and in future 2027, which is going to be revised by the WADA. And we as a signatory, we having some modification as per the requirement of our country and the law of land, we revise and update our existing anti-doping rules in compliance to the World Anti-Doping Code. Anti-doping rules are adopted and implemented in accordance with the NADA responsibilities under the code and in furtherance of the government's commitment towards continuing efforts to eradicate doping in our country. Anti-doping rule is applicable for all the sports stakeholders in our country and all are abide by the same with regard to the implementation purpose. There are some references that I have gathered information and subject from the UNESCO Convention Against Doping in Sports, World Anti-Doping Code, which you can see, and for further information and knowledge, you can all refer these references, which are very useful to have some more information about this topic. And with this I conclude my presentation. Thank you everyone.